Welcome! We're so excited to have you for this 3-day brush pen crash course. I'm Jillian and this is Jordan, and we are twins, and hi everyone! Yeah, please feel free to say hello and where you're from. Just a really quick background on who we are in case you're new to the group. First of all, thank you for joining the group. We're excited to have you, and we have tons of members in here that are so supportive to each other, and we're just excited that you're now part of the group. So we have been doing lettering and calligraphy for like really as long as we can remember. We took our first official calligraphy class when we were 11 years old, and we've been really studying it for the past, I guess it's been 3.5 years now. It always updates. 3.5 years. And teaching it for the past 1.5 years. Yeah, so we have taught hundreds of students in person in workshops, and then we also teach online classes now, and we have a very lively, interactive community here in our Facebook group, so I'm so glad you are all here. Yes, and so the goal is for tonight and for the next 3 days is to talk all about brush pens. So we get your notepad out or your worksheets. We're going to be filling in the blanks on here and to get started here. So, all right, I'm going to flip my camera around. So the first question on our worksheet is, what are some characteristics of calligraphy? Now, when we talk about what calligraphy is, I also want to talk about what calligraphy is not. So calligraphy is not the same as cursive, first of all, and here's just a little image that shows handwriting, cursive, calligraphy, and modern calligraphy. So handwriting is what you would normally use every day when you're just maybe jotting down notes or writing in a planner or something, if you're just getting things down quickly on paper, and that is also what you might use cursive for. So cursive, the point of cursive is to write quickly, and so in cursive, you can see all the letters are connected together. So calligraphy, it kind of looks like cursive because the letters are connected together, whereas in handwriting, you might not have letters connected, or some of them might be, like you can see here. Calligraphy, the letters are connected, but calligraphy is not the same as cursive. So, like I said, you might use cursive when you're trying to write things quickly. However, calligraphy is, the letters, we like to think of them as being drawn stroke by stroke, so the point is not to write as fast as you can, but it really actually takes a lot of time and can be a slow process, but that's because you are achieving this beautiful look of thick and thin lines, which is another characteristic of calligraphy. And it also follows specific rules. So for instance, the proportions of the letters, you can see that all, like the letter A and the letter this A are the same height in I, and then the letters that go above, which this is called ascending letters, like L and H are the same height, and then the Y and G are the same height. They're also all the same width, the letters are. So those are some of the kind of rules of calligraphy. And then modern calligraphy is similar, but you can have more fun with the letters and the rules aren't quite as strict. But learning calligraphy is a very important foundation for if you want to learn modern calligraphy. So I'm going to show this image down here. So the top word is monoline and the bottom word is calligraphy, and they are each written in the style of the word. So monoline, you can see that the weight of all of the strokes in this word are all the same width. So no matter where you look, the thickness of the line is the same. But in calligraphy, you can see that there are parts where the lines are thin, like this right side of the L, and parts where the lines are thick, like the left side of the L or this part of the I. And so that is one of the main characteristics, is that there's a contrast between thick and thin strokes. Okay, so how do we create thick and thin strokes? And there are different types of calligraphy tools that you can use. So I'm going to just show you some example pictures. So the first group I'm going to show you is calligraphy that uses a broad edge pen. So this is called italic calligraphy. This is an image from Paper and Ink Arts on Instagram. So this script is called italic calligraphy, and it's created using what's called a broad edge pen. So I'm just going to get a piece of paper over here and show you what a broad edge pen looks like, just so that you can see. So a broad edge pen looks like this. It's like a chisel tip, and you can create thick and thin lines based on the direction that you're drawing. So if I draw in this direction, it's a thick line. If I draw in this direction, it's a thin line. Okay, so this is how you create the difference between thin and thick lines using what's called a broad edge pen. Okay, so that is the type that you would use for italic calligraphy, which is this image. You would also use a broad edge pen for Gothic calligraphy, and this image was taken from Nina Tran on Instagram. So this is Gothic calligraphy. It has a little bit different look from italic, but it uses the same type of pen. Okay, and then here's another example of Gothic calligraphy compared to brush calligraphy on top. This is also from Instagram, from this account, and you can search any of these just by searching on Instagram for these types of names or on Google. Okay, so that is broad edge, and what I was just showing you is a broad edge nib that is on a marker. Okay, so when I'm writing, the ink is inside of the marker and it's coming out as I'm drawing on the page. I don't have to dip the pen into ink in order to get the ink to flow. It's already inside of this pen. Now there are different pens called dip pens that you actually have to dip in ink. And dip pens are made of steel, so this is an example of a dip pen. And specifically, this is called a pointed pen. So the chisel tip one did not have a point. It's like flat on the top. But if you look at the tip of this one, it comes to a point. Okay? And I'm going to show you. So if I just try to write with it right now, nothing is happening because there is no ink loaded onto the pen. So that's why it's called a dip pen, because you actually have to dip it in ink. So I have a little container of ink right here. I'm going to dip my pen into it. And then, now that I've dipped my pen, I can make thick and thin lines. So the way that this one is creating thick and thin lines, you can see right what just happened right there. As I'm pressing down on the pen, the top is separating as I apply pressure, and that's what's giving me a contrast between thin and thick lines. Okay, so there are different styles that you can write with a pointed pen. So a pointed pen is what I just showed you. And two examples are Spencerian script. So you can think of this as like the font name. So Spencerian looks like this. This is from the IAMPETH website, IAMPETH. And this is copperplate. So this is an image from one of our courses. Okay, and you can see in this image here that it was written with this pointed pen that we just showed. Okay, and then lastly we have brush calligraphy. So this is what we are going to be talking about today. And so just to answer a question about the dip pen, with the dip pen, as you're writing, you do have to continuously reload with ink. So you can see that I just made these strokes and then I started to run out, so then I would have to dip again in order to keep writing with it. Okay? But with the pen that we used first, the chisel tip one that was a marker, so the more I write with this, the more ink comes out. A marker, including brush pens. So what I'm about to show you is a brush pen. This has ink in it as well, so I'm not going to have to dip this into a jar of ink like I did for the pointed pen. It has it already in the marker, and that's one of the benefits of brush pens over the steel and calligraphy pens. So the way that you create thick and thin lines with a brush pen is that it is flexible. Okay, so I'm going to draw a thin line, and then I'm going to do the same thing, but this time I'm going to push down on the tip of the pen, and now I can draw a thick line. Okay, so by changing the amount of pressure that I'm using, I'm getting this contrast between thick and thins. So another type of calligraphy pen that I didn't mention is a quill, and that is basically a feather that is cut to act like the nib of a steel nibbed pen. Okay, so this is a brush pen, and you can see that we're getting the same contrast between thick and thins. So if you compare what we've done up here so far, this pen, the way we got thick and thin lines was by changing the direction that we're writing in. So if the thick part is along the direction we're writing versus if the thin part is along the direction we're writing, we're not changing the amount of pressure that we're using, we're just changing the direction. For the pointed pen, we are changing the amount of pressure, so not using any pressure allows us to create thin lines, and then applying pressure allows us to create thick lines, and that's the same for the brush pen. Light pressure and heavy pressure. Okay, so this is Jillian again. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to tell the difference between us when we're talking and you can't see our faces, and our nails are painted the same color right now. But just in case you are following along with the worksheet, I wanted to summarize, yes, that was an Artist Loft pen, summarize what we've talked about so far. So for characteristics of calligraphy, as Jordan mentioned, we have thick strokes and thin strokes. So whereas regular writing, like what I'm doing right now, is just the same thickness of line, calligraphy has, like if I make this T thicker, calligraphy is going to have thicks and thins, and that's what we demonstrated here with the different variations on the weight of the line. Another characteristic of calligraphy is that there are different styles, and it's a very disciplined, that's how you spell it, right? Disciplined skill. So modern calligraphy is great because there's lots of rules that you can break, but if you're looking at the historical scripts, like the ones that Jordan mentioned, like Gothic and Italic and even copperplate, those have some very specific rules and guidelines and things that people who do those kind of scripts follow. Okay? And what else did we talk about for characteristics of calligraphy? Oh, one thing is that you don't have to be artistic, and you don't have to have neat handwriting. There's lots of calligraphers who have really messy handwriting, and like for Jordan and I mean, we don't really do many other types of art, like we're not really good at painting or drawing, but we still do calligraphy, and there's lots of people who aren't artistic in the sense that they feel like they can do lots of different forms of art. You just need to be able to draw certain shapes to put them together. Okay, and then how are brush pens different from steel and quill calligraphy pens? So for steel and quill, you are dipping the pen in ink, and that's like what Jordan was showing with this pointed pen. So this nib right here is steel, and so the pressure is, or the thicks and the thins are created with this pointed pen by adding pressure to make the thick strokes. And then brush pens we'll talk on the next page about all the types of the different characteristics of brush pens, but they are essentially markers that have the ink inside of them, and you use pressure to create variation. So while that technically is the same as the pointed pen, using pressure to create variation, there are steel nibs that you use the direction of the pen to create the variation in, that's not, I didn't spell that right, did I? To create variation. Hard to talk and write at the same time. Okay, and then also the other great thing about brush pens is that they are portable. So you can throw them in your purse, not have to worry about ink spilling everywhere. Okay, so now we are going to talk about the number one mistake that we see beginners making with brush pens. If anyone has a guess, please put it in the comments now, but we are going to talk about this for a few minutes because it's very important, and it's an easy mistake to avoid that can save you lots of frustration and money. So, the number one mistake that beginners make when using brush pens. I haven't seen anyone comment. Yes, there, I see it. Using rough paper. So I'm just gonna write wrong paper. So there are lots of things that beginners just don't know when starting that aren't necessarily mistakes. So don't feel like you're making a huge mistake if you're using the wrong paper or like there's anything wrong with you, but it's something that we really want to bring to your attention because it's so important. So even though there are lots of things that can be improved when you're a beginner, like all of the things that you guys are mentioning, using the wrong paper is just super easy to fix. So when you first get started with brush pens, you might buy a pack from Michael's or online, and you're so excited to use them that you just grab the nearest sheet of copy paper from your printer or cardstock and start writing on it. And that is, yeah, I see some people saying that they were one of those people. Yeah, we definitely were too. We destroyed lots of brush pens in the beginning, but I'm glad we learned. So if you grab a piece of regular paper, something that you already have, then that's very dangerous because even though you can't really tell, the paper, if you were to look at it under a microscope at regular paper versus really smooth paper, the regular paper is really rough and has like teeth that catch on the tip of the brush pen. So we're going to talk about what the brush pen tip is made of on the next page. But if you're writing on really rough paper, it's kind of like a cheese grater or like sandpaper, where it just shreds the tip of it and then it makes it really hard to write with and destroys the tip. So you're going to save a lot of money if you use the right kind of paper. Even if it is more expensive to buy smooth paper, it's worth it for the amount of money that you're going to save by not having to replace the brush pens. So wrong paper / not using smooth paper. So we're going to talk about what kinds of paper you can use, but the answer is to avoid this mistake, use smooth paper. All right, I'm going to go through several different kinds that I have here in front of me. So, and there are some differences in when you may want to use some of these as well. Okay, so the first one, and actually what this worksheet is printed on, which is why I'm okay with writing on it with a brush pen, is HP Premium 32-pound paper. So this paper is super smooth, and you can get this on Amazon. That's where I got this package. And so this paper is great because it's fairly cheap for the per sheet cost. Now, the one thing I will say about it is, I mean, you can see, you know what a piece of paper looks like. There's no lines on it, obviously, if it's just a blank piece of paper. So you do need to, so it's great to practice on because of how smooth it is, but the two ways that you can use this paper effectively, and I saw someone mention having guidelines, is a mistake that beginners make. So using guidelines or using straight lines to write on is really important. And so if you're using blank paper, then there's no guidelines for you. So you can either print guidelines on your paper, which I'll show you an example of that in a minute, or you can use a light pad underneath your paper with lined paper so that you can see the lines coming up through the paper. Okay, so the first one was HP Premium 32-pound. All right, the next really smooth paper that we recommend is the brand is called Rhodia, and there's lots of great things about this. First of all, it's super smooth, so it's great for your brush pens because it won't ruin them. Also, you can see on this one, this has dots on it, so it's kind of like built-in guidelines already. So they have the dot paper like this, and this is from a long time ago. And they also have lined paper like this. So it's nice because it already has the lines on it, plus these pads are bound so you can keep all of your work together. The one that I just showed you, the dot one, is from like 3 years ago and we still have it, so that's pretty neat. Okay, so then after Rhodia, the next one, and this is what I've been using a lot lately, is marker paper. It's similar to tracing paper in that it's nice and smooth. So if I take something that you may have already seen before, so this brush pen crash course, if you saw the video that we made to share the event for this brush pen crash course, this was done on marker paper. So I have these guidelines that I printed, and these are actually on our website for free if you want them. But if you, can you guys see through this? So the marker paper is super smooth, but it's also semi-transparent so that you can see the guidelines. Oh, actually, I think I might have used a different size guideline because this isn't matching up. But anyway, I can see the guides underneath, and so now I have a nice straight baseline, and it's going to help a whole lot with how consistent the lettering is and how straight everything is. So, Canson marker paper, and it's bound at the top so you just can rip off sheets and use them on top of guidelines like this. So highly recommend this. It's great for practicing and it's so smooth, it feels really nice. Alright, and then the last paper that I was going to talk about, we haven't really talked about this one in this group, but I wanted to bring it up because so if you want to do like a final piece on paper, but you want it to be a little bit thicker than tracing paper, this brand, I've had this for forever, and it's called Clairefontaine, I guess is how you say it. It's less transparent or thicker than the marker paper, but you can still see through it. So if I grab another sheet here and put it under just to show you, so you can still see through it, but it's thicker than the marker paper, but it's still nice and smooth. So this, and it's, I think this is 9 by 11. So it's a nice size if you wanted to frame something. I'll just also write them here. So we had the HP Premium 32 pound, which is the loose leaf paper. We have Rhodia is the brand of those pads. Then the Canson, or you can use any brand of marker paper or tracing paper, as long as it's nice and smooth. And then the last one that I mentioned was Clairefontaine. Okay, so basically you want to avoid, okay, so is the paper based on the weight? Wait, or grams? So in the US, it's based on pounds, so like this is 32 pound, but the important part is that it's premium, HP premium paper. And if you live elsewhere, actually if you do live elsewhere and you found paper that works for you, maybe we can start a thread in the group where you can share it. We can start a thread in the group where you can share what kind of paper you use and where you found it in your country, because it definitely is going to vary based on where you live. A couple more notes before we move on to the next page so these are ones to use, but for the ones to avoid would be anything like watercolor paper, watercolor paper or glossy paper. So even though like photo paper, like if you print pictures on glossy paper, even though it feels smooth, that's not going to work, especially for water-based brush pens. It's not going to stick. And then avoid using cardstock and copy paper, because even though copy paper might feel smooth to your hand. Oh yeah, good question. So yeah, so watercolor paper, we've used brush pens on watercolor paper only when the brush pens are already ruined, or it's actually a good idea to have a set if it's in your budget to have like a few brush pens set aside that you only use on cardstock or watercolor paper if you really want to. If you want to use it on that kind of paper, so just set them aside and only use them for that so that you don't mix them up with your good brush pens. Okay, and then, another benefit of using smooth paper besides saving a bunch of money because you won't ruin your brush pens is that it's a little bit easier to glide your hand on the page and the brush pen, so there's less friction, which makes it easier to do nice smooth strokes, and if you're doing something like flourishing, then it can be easier to slide your hand down the page. Okay, so now we're going to look at the specific characteristics of brush pens and show you some differences. So the first category here is tip type. First tip type for brush pens is felt tip. I'm going to show an example of each of these. And then another type of tip is bristles. Okay, so for felt tip, I'm going to zoom in. An example of a felt tip pen is this koi coloring brush. And if you look at the tip of it, it looks almost like rubber or like a tightly woven sponge. And it's one solid piece. Okay, so when I write with it, it's just one solid piece. The other type is bristles, and you can think of this as being like a paintbrush. So looking up close, it might not look like bristles, but once I press down, you'll be able to see that the bristles spread out and gives it this kind of brushy look like you would get with a paintbrush. Okay, so that's the difference between felt and bristles. These are use a piece of paper here and show you more up close. These are individual bristles. It's kind of hard to make them separate, but it's not one solid piece. And this brush was the Zig Clean Color brush. Okay, so this gives you, it can give you the appearance of what a normal paintbrush might look like. Alright, the next category is springiness or flexibility. Okay, and on the one end is firm, and the other end of the spectrum is flexible. So firm tipped pens are much stiffer, and the example I'm going to show you for this is the Artline Sticks brush marker. Okay, so if I'm going to apply pressure with this pen, I have to push down pretty hard. I'm like really pushing down on it. You can maybe hear that noise it's making in order to get this really thick line here. So if I'm just pushing down a little bit, then it's not quite as thick. But if I show you with a Tombow, so this is a Tombow dual brush pen. This is a really popular pen. And if I barely even press on this one, I'm like barely pressing on it, it's making this huge thick line. I can press even harder and get even thicker line, but the difference between these two is that even without pressing down very hard, I'm still getting a thick line, which means that this is more flexible. So flexible pens are a little bit harder to control. And yes, so just like if you compare felt and bristles, the bristles might be a little bit harder to control just because it's all separate pieces. And so maybe if you were like making something like a circle shape, that it would be harder to control versus if you were using the felt tip one. But it just takes practice to get the feeling down for how to use each type. So the firmer tips might be easier to control, and they come back to their original shape after applying pressure. So any of the brush pens, after you apply pressure and then come back, it springs back to its original shape. Okay, so depending on if you are very heavy-handed or if you maybe have a lighter hand, might influence whether it's better for you personally to practice with a more flexible or a firmer tip. So using a very flexible tip like this Tombow brush pen is you really have to train your hand and concentrate a lot in order to be able to get a difference between thin and thick lines, because there's so little difference in the amount of pressure that you need to apply. Whereas for this firmer one, I really have to think about really pushing down in order to get these thick lines. So there's more of a difference in what I'm doing in order to get the contrast. So if you have a really heavy hand, it might be frustrating to use a really flexible pen at first, but if you do start with a really flexible pen, then you are really training yourself, and it's easier to then go to a firmer pen than if you started the other way around. So if you are able to master the control of something that's really flexible, then it will be easier for you to use something that's firmer or smaller. Okay, so it's kind of like if you start with the hardest thing, then everything else is easier. Okay, so those are firm and flexible. The next category that we're going to look at is the ink type. Okay, so I'm going to show you two pens. So the two pens I'm going to show you for this are both Zig brand. You can see they're both Zig, and the first one is Fudubiori. The second one is Brushable. Now, if we just look at the description on these two, what do you see under the word Zig? So for the first one, it says water-based dye ink, and the second one says pigment ink. Okay, so that's the difference between these two, is that this is water-based and this is pigment. So this one also, the pigment ink also says archival quality and light fast and waterproof. So basically, if you use this pen, the one that is pigment-based, it is going to be, it's going to last longer. So it won't fade if it is exposed to sunlight. It won't smear if it is exposed to water. But the benefit of using water-based pens is that you can do cool things like blend them together or purposely take advantage of the water. Okay, so they don't really look that different when we write with them. Like, just based on looking at them, you might not be able to really tell. Okay, so this one, the color is much darker. The pigment base might look a little bit more rich of a color. Okay, so the I guess I should write the name. So dye versus pigment. Okay, so the water-based dye ink was a Zig Fudubiori. And this pigment was the Zig Brushables. The next category is the size. And there is small-tipped brush pens, and it ranges from small all the way to large. Okay, so an example of a small-tip brush pen, I'm going to show you two. This first one is the Pentel, you can see it, Pentel sign pen with a brush tip. So compared to all of these pens that we've been writing with so far, you might be surprised at how small this one is. Okay, so this is kind of the maximum thickness I can get with this small tip brush pen compared to that thickness. Another one is this Tombow Fudenosuke colored brush pen, or it also comes in black, but the colors are new. So this is, the thin lines on this one are even smaller, and this one is the hard tip. So this one is firmer, and it's a little bit easier to control. Okay, so those are small tip, and then we're going to go all the way up to a very, very large tip, the Eco line. Okay, so these pens, you can just see based on the tip size how big it is, but when I press down on it, look how big of a line you can get with that, and look how juicy that is. So all of these I would say are large. I would say this one might even be extra large. Okay, so these are really beautiful pens. Okay, so the smaller tip pens are usually a little bit firmer, and they're great for small lettering if you needed to do something like an envelope or something that you don't need to write huge. And then large tip are great for larger pieces, and you can do cool things with them, like with the dye-based ones you can do really cool blending. And the tips of the large brush pens are usually juicier and usually more flexible than the small tip. Okay, let's look at the last category, which is duality. And the difference, or the two types, are single tip or dual tip. So what I've been using this whole time to write these words in blue has been one end of this marker, which is a Artist Loft dual tip marker. So the end I've been using is called a bullet tip. I'm going to put the cap back on that side and then open the other end, and this other end is a brush pen. Okay, so one end of it is the brush pen, the other end is a monoline pen. Okay, and then single tipped would be anything that only has one tip, one end. Here's an example, Marvy Color In. This just has the brush tip on one end and the other end does not have a pen. Okay, this one is pretty flexible as well. And then you can also have two brush pens on a single pen. So these Zig brushables actually have two colors on them. So one of the sides is a lighter purple brush pen, and then if you flip it around, it's just a darker purple. And these all come in lots of colors. Okay, so that was our chart, just showing some examples. We basically just chose a few example brands to show you, just to give a wide variety. We're going to be talking more about the specific brands in a different video. Okay, so hopefully you guys have been enjoying this so far. So just a reminder that this was day 1 of 3 for this brush pen crash course, and I wanted to give you a little sneak peek at what you, these are all the pens we just went through. Yeah, and we'll answer the questions at the end. So just a sneak peek about what we are going to talk about tomorrow. So tomorrow's day 2. If you downloaded the worksheets, then it says what day it is at the top right here. Right, someone asked about the tip type. So all of the tips that we showed are felt tip. The only one that was not felt tip, the bristle one, is this Zig clean color brush, the one that looks like a paintbrush. All of the rest of them are felt tip, and that's probably what you are going to be using for brush lettering. Yes, exactly. Okay. We're going to share a chair here. Okay, so tomorrow, first we're going to talk about the benefits of learning calligraphy and lettering, and we'll have you guys chime in if you have been doing calligraphy and lettering, just to see like what your perspective is and why you do it. This is for tomorrow. Yes, so tomorrow. Then the second topic for tomorrow is what are the challenges of using brush pens? And we actually did a survey. You may have answered the survey in the email that we sent, and we got over 250 responses. So we'll be sharing the results tomorrow. And then, okay. Then next we'll talk about what makes brush pens specifically great for calligraphy, what kinds of brush pens are best for starting out, and we'll talk about some of the special effects that you can do with brush pens that you can't do with other calligraphy tools. Yeah, so I just saw some questions coming in about asking if we can show you how to blend. So that kind of stuff, like special effects, we'll be talking about tomorrow. Yep, okay. Let's just scroll back and see if we have any questions that we missed. So the problem isn't so much the ink lasting for Tombows, it's more of the tip. So I've never actually like run out of ink with a Tombow. The reason that I would have to stop using it is because it started to become frayed, and this is something that doesn't happen immediately unless if you're following the suggested papers that we talked about today. So if you're using smooth paper, then this will not happen immediately, but it does tend to happen over time, and the more you use your pens, the more they kind of start to wear down just from the pressure that you're applying to them. So the ink lasting long is not really going to be a problem. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed today's lesson so far. I'm really excited about tomorrow to share the results of the survey with you, because for as many people as who answered it, for as many people as there were who answered the survey, just the amount of people who said the same thing as each other was pretty crazy of what my biggest struggle is with using brush pens. So I'm excited to share the results of that tomorrow. I thought I saw maybe one more question before we wrap up. Okay, the brand for the second small tip pen, so that was the Tombow Funosuke, and these are new in color. They used to be just in black. And so Wednesday we'll talk all about brush pen brands and send you some specific recommendations.